All right, now let's move on and talk about Afghanistan. The first couple stories here are looking back at the withdrawal, and we're getting more details about what actually happened there. And a lot of it is confirming what me and Will had speculated was true on the show. This came out in the, I think, House committee, but it could have been Senate. Mackenzie, Milley, and Lloyd Austin. So Lloyd Austin's a retired general, now supposed to be like kind of in a civilian post as the Secretary of Defense, and then you have Milley, who's the commander of the Joint Chiefs, and Mackenzie, who is the head of CENTCOM. All, you know, current or former four-star generals were testifying in front of Congress, you know, about the different things going on. I'll get into Milley's stuff in relation to the Woodward. I want to look into it a little bit more later, but I want to talk about here in reference to Afghanistan on today's show some of those comments. This one from Frank McKenzie saying that the U.S. Was offered by the Taliban. I guess Mullah Baradar told the U.S. that you're either going to have to take responsibility for securing Kabul, or the Taliban were doing it. And so they were kind of saying that the first option, if the U.S. wanted it, they could secure Kabul. And this was after the president, Ashraf Ghani, fled the country on August 15th, right? So the Afghan government is now gone. There's no security force in Kabul. The Taliban say, we're going to, you know, you do it or we're going to do it. And the response from the U.S., and this was relayed through U.S. special envoy to Afghanistan, the guy who's been negotiating with the Taliban all along, Zalmay Khalilzad, and he says that the U.S. can't do it because they don't have the personnel, the capabilities to do that at this time. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I guess, believe it. It would have been, you know, it's a massive city. And so the idea that the U.S. Would be able to get all those resources, and it would have been a major, probably, increase in troops if the U.S. elected to do that. That being said, like, maybe that, I don't know. I really don't know how true that is, like, on a logistical standpoint. Maybe they just didn't want to do it. But, you know, that was the statement there. But this does, again, reflect what me and Will talked about and had reported on the show at the time, that the Taliban did only enter Kabul after there was no other force to you know, secure the city, right? And that is at least a significant detail of the events, and it does cut against what the president Ashraf Ghani has said. He's tried to put forward the narrative that that he had to leave the city, that he only fled because the Taliban, it was in an agreement with the Taliban to basically save the city, and that doesn't seem to be the case. The Taliban actually wanted to negotiate a political transition before moving into the city. You know, they were going to take it, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, but they were willing to negotiate a political transition, and that was screwed up when the president fled. Now, there is another interesting story here on Reuters, and it's an exclusive. They got a document that was produced by the World Bank and the IMF days after the Afghan government fell. This is from Reuters. Exclusive: Afghan central bank drained dollar stockpile before Kabul fell. And it's very interesting that not only was it drained before Kabul fell, but they started doing this essentially July 1st. And so it seems like, you know, the people who wanted to loot Afghanistan were revving up to do that pretty early on here. The article says this is a confidential 2-day brief, again, produced by the IMF and World Bank. And the report says that the foreign exchange reserves in Afghanistan's central bank vaults in Kabul have been completed, and the central bank cannot meet cash requirements. And so it's important to realize that as the Taliban are coming in, that this government is already broken. It's not like they're seizing a central bank with billions of dollars, although up until this point, the U.S. was bringing in roughly $250 million every 3 months in cash, in $100 bills cash, to the Afghan government. Now, what is reported here that between 1.5 and 700 and I think $14 million were auctioned off in local foreign currency exchanges. And look, I'm not an economics expert and I really can't 100% explain what's going on here, but it seems like they were selling off their dollars and are auctioning off their dollars to buy local currency and what they say to prop up the local markets. Again, I'm not sure how true it is. They could have just been stealing the money. They could have been, giving it to their friends. The Afghan government seems to dispute the $1.5 billion number and says that the number was actually, I think they say 712 billion, that they basically put out 1.5 billion dollars in offer, but only accepted like half of that. And this is something that happens, but again, I'm not willing to just take the Afghan government and what its central bank said on its face, because I think a lot of this money was probably stolen. The report concluded that the number, again, these transactions happened between June 1st and August 15th, was strikingly high. Now, for people who are maybe wondering, the U.S. gives the money, the Afghan government, a lot more than $1 billion a year. They just give them $1 billion in cash. A lot of the Afghan government's money is held in offshore reserves. Like right now, there's $9 billion left in that account. Of course, it's frozen and they're not letting the Taliban have access to it. But, a lot of like the aid that comes in, money will be given to the Afghan government by the UN, etc. And then they'll buy products from, Pakistan or whatever other country, and all those transactions, will happen without actual US dollars entering Afghanistan. And so this is just the money that the Afghan government uses for its operations, within Afghanistan, providing, maybe welfare to its citizens or payment for government jobs, stuff like that. Right. And so then there is a report here from the Afghan government. They claim that part of this sell-off had to happen because they had $700 million in liabilities to local exchange banks. This could all be corrupt, and I kind of lean towards that it is, but I'm not sure. But I just wanted to break all this down because I think it is significant, and the American people should be really asking where the hell all this money went and who exactly stole it, because I think some of the worst people in the world actually stole this money. People who do awful things, warlords who rule with an iron fist, the kind of warlords who rape young boys and who oppress women, and we may have given them a lot of money through the corruption here. We should be really asking where this money went. Now, the report also questions, this isn't quite as large of a sum of money, but $202 million that was moved into provincial banks, right? So mostly, I guess, in the past, it said in 2019 there was only $12.9 million of the Afghan government's central bank cash that was held in the provincial bank. So I'm guessing like Kandahar had a bank, Ghani had a bank, all these, Hared had a bank, right? And so, there's money there, and then, they had to use this money to pay the street cleaners and whoever the hell else works for the Afghan government, right? I'm sure that's what a lot of it goes towards. And then also, maybe local aid projects. So you're going to pay some guy to build a school or something like that. Maybe that's what part of this money is going towards. However, around the end of 2012, so again, remember in 2019, it's 12.9 billion. At the end of 2012, or 2020, it's $202 million. And so that's, a large increase. And it admits that some of the money was reported stolen or lost, and it says in parentheses stolen, from some of these banks. And it doesn't say how much, but it does say that it was stolen, although not by the Taliban. And so it wasn't even the Taliban that stole this money, but other actors in Afghanistan. Who knows who's running around with millions, potentially, of U.S. dollars. More, life-changing amounts of money. Money that would, could potentially sustain people for their entire lives. We're talking about getting lost somewhere in Afghanistan. and this is huge, and it's barely being reported on. And the congressional hearings should really be reporting and trying to figure out where this money went, and then holding corrupt officials accountable when they stole this money, and figure out who they gave it to. All right. Another note from the Milley Austin McKenzie hearing, and this from General Mark Milley. He says that he told Biden that the U.S. should have kept 2,500 troops in Afghanistan, not completely withdrawn from the country. Although this was kind of shown to be delusional in his own hearing. I saw an exchange I believe he had with Senator Warren, where she asked him what would happen, and he said, well, this would kind of mean war with the Taliban. So I'm not sure what he really thought the long-term plan was, unless he was really hoping that essentially staying would provoke Taliban attacks and would put Biden in a political position where he had to agree to a surge. That's kind of my speculation here, but it's very interesting that, our own commander of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, can't even put together a really coherent narrative of what his strategy for Afghanistan would have been. The U.S. would have needed far more than 30,000 soldiers to fight this war. I don't know how many we would have needed. The Taliban have made significant gains by this point. If we were prepared to fight them in a war, tens and tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers. Now, looking at U.S. drone strikes in Afghanistan moving forward, apparently the drones are still flying. The Taliban, through their representative in Dawa, said that the U.S. was violating their airspace with drones, and this is consistent with what the U.S. has said, that they're going to continue surveillance and overhorizon capabilities in Afghanistan. So that means potentially carrying out drone strikes, although I haven't read of any drone strikes reported so far in September. And that the last drone strike would have been the August 29th strike that killed the 10 civilians in Kabul. And so, this is putting the U.S. at odds with the Taliban. Now, an interesting statement from the Pentagon spokesperson, John Kirby. He said that the U.S. won't be asking the Taliban for permission to launch any airstrikes in Afghanistan. This seems to be somewhat unfortunate, maybe, that, the U.S. airstrikes in Afghanistan are not going to target the Taliban, or at least that's what the U.S. has put forward. They say, it's going to target the jihadist threats or the terrorist, groups like ISIS, Khorasan faction, right? So the idea that we wouldn't consult or work with the Taliban on this to say, make sure that we're not targeting civilians or something like that seems to be kind of absurd. And I guess if Kirby really just means like, hey, if we want to kill somebody in Afghanistan, we're going to do it regardless of what the Taliban say. However, having a line open with the Taliban, communicating with them on these issues seems to be a way it could prevent, unnecessary conflict between the U.S. and the Taliban, but also maybe help the U.S. get better intelligence and know who they're striking, because obviously they struggle with that in Afghanistan, and it could help avoid civilian casualties, I think. So just something to think about. Now, the U.S., this was reported from the Wall Street Journal, that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, asked his Russian counterpart in Finland, it says last week, so about 10 days ago, about an apparent offer from Vladimir Putin to allow the U.S. To use its bases in Central Asia to spy on Afghanistan. It was reported that the Russian general's response was non-committal on the issue. Now, remember back, I think maybe in early August, Russia was making offers to, kind of work with the U.S. on counterterrorism in Afghanistan going forward. It seems the U.S. is now maybe looking to take Russia off on that offer. But at the same time, I'm not sure, how much coordination there's going to be when tensions between the U.S. and Russia are so high. And I'll talk about some of the reasons later in the show. All right. So one more, and hopefully this will be the last update on the show that I do with terrible news about the August 29th airstrike in Kabul. There's another report, and this is a video report from the New York Times. I got it on mute, but I will play it in the background here. And the report kind of goes to the house that the Pentagon claims was an ISIS safe house, and they said even when they apologized and admitted that they killed 10 civilians and it was the tragic mistake that General Milley took responsibility for, even though, or McKenzie took responsibility for, even though, you know, he's still in his position and hasn't done anything differently. But one of the things they stuck with was that he visited an ISIS safe house. And then the New York Times goes in Afghanistan and they go to the suspected ISIS safe house. And from the footage they have, it's very clearly not an ISIS safe house. So this is another problem with the Pentagon narrative. You know, you would think that after getting it so wrong that they would not like assert that they had any of this right, but they continue to do so. And, you know, more accountability needs to be had. And of course, General McKenzie should be fired immediately for continuing to lie about this atrocity. This report from Reuters, titled "War Crimes Prosecutor Would Not Focus on U.S. Forces in New Afghan Probe." And so going forward, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, prosecutor assigned to the Afghan file, his name is Kamir Khan. He is going to be focusing only on the Taliban, ISIS-K. Now, I guess in some way this maybe makes a little bit of sense, just because the U.S. is never going to let the ICC hold any of its generals accountable for any war crimes they committed. It's just not going to happen, right? So you're kind of like not going anywhere with that. However, only targeting the sides of the war that oppose the U.S. Definitely misses a very important part of the war crimes that have been committed in Afghanistan. And even if U.S. officials aren't prosecuted by the ICC doing an investigation and making that report public about U.S. war crimes, at least informs the U.S. of who the criminals in our society are. And so I'm really disappointed by this. And then of course, even if you look at it from maybe more of a practical perspective and say, well, you know, ISIS-K still exists in Afghanistan, the Taliban are now in charge, and so maybe, you know, we should hold those kind of leadership positions accountable and take out war criminals who are currently in positions of power. But the war criminals in the U.S. are in positions of power. Also, they're laying off the Afghan government, which, while it no longer exists, the people who made up the Afghan government did, and they committed a hell of a lot of war crimes themselves.